Ms Cook, from your experience of previous disasters and disaster relief efforts, you think there are some important points to bear in mind?
Well, it's an extremely challenging situation out there because of the country itself struggling. The government itself is struggling to support any response at all. All the factors are against them really. The infrastructure is very challenged. The geography is very challenging. The country is very poor anyway, has a very poor response capability itself, so it's relying heavily on international aid to come in and do the whole support process really.
And we'll put these points in a moment to Mr Dwyer, but you feel that the United Nations Organisation of Response sometimes doesn't have the power really to get it right.
Well, they're quite reliant on the sovereignty of the country themselves to invite teams in and coordinate the response in country. The UN in these sorts of situations, and it was very similar in Haiti, where the UN have to try and take on really the whole responsibility of what a national government would try and do in most cases. So they have a really overwhelming challenge in front of them to do that. And in this situation, it can be very challenging from the point of view that aid is coming in from all around the world in all sorts of shapes and guises, and is really difficult to coordinate. So it's a really uphill struggle for them in this situation.
I mean, Mr Dwyer, is it a problem? I mean, of course you have to respect the sovereignty of the countries which you're trying to help, but does that sometimes mean it's less effective than it might be?
Well, in Nepal, the leadership of the country, the top leadership of the country, has been very quick to ask for the assistance of the international community, and has absolutely welcomed the coordination of the United Nations in that. So that in itself is not a problem in Nepal. What is the problem in Nepal is just the massive scale of the earthquake and the massive scale of the losses and the damage. And exactly as Mr Cook said, the national authorities don't themselves have all of the setup able to handle this, but almost no country could have in these geographical situations. But also the weather is very, very difficult. The existing infrastructure, even before it was damaged, was not up to a quick response. So, for example, the challenge that we have at the airport to make sure that it does not get clogged up and that aid supplies, rescue teams can get in, people can get out as they need to, including indeed commercial goods can come in and out. So there are massive challenges, but this essentially stems from the incredible suddenness that an earthquake brings and the massive scale of this earthquake. The Nepali authorities are challenged, but they're very committed. The Nepali police and military are very engaged. The neighbouring countries are very engaged, and we do see aid coming in from all over the world. Coordinating that is indeed a challenge, but we're working 24/7 on this. We're in day 4 since the quake itself hit.
What about dealing with people? Because obviously they have very, very urgent needs. They're desperate. That too, presumably, is a priority which might not be, if you were in a clinical environment, necessarily the top one.
Well, obviously the first response that you've seen already is the search and rescue teams that go in the very early stages. They tend to move fastest and get on the ground very, very quickly to try and do the rescue, and that in itself is a challenge. And very quickly, as was mentioned there, the coordination needs to move on to look after the people's longer-term needs, the food, the water, the shelter. So it changes very rapidly in those early stages, and that whole coordination and linking up those different aspects, those different parts of the process goes on and on. You really see the headlines in the news of the rescue side of it, but you don't see what goes on for weeks and months afterwards. A more complex and difficult challenge.
And Mr Dwyer, how does it work? Do you have, as it were, in reserve the resources that the United Nations needs to respond to a situation like this, or is it a question of having to go around the member nations and get them to contribute?
Our office, the coordination, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, has standby arrangements with member countries all around the world, so that when a disaster strikes like this, they already have their personnel and their equipment on standby and move immediately. So it's not a question of the United Nations itself having stockpiles or staff on hand with all of the technical expertise, but the search and rescue teams are coming from a large number of member states. But they were already lined up and ready to come in at a moment's notice when you have a disaster like this. So that system has worked well here in Nepal. There's been a challenge getting people in that airport, as I had said, but we have over 500 international search and rescue people on the ground right now with teams of dogs trying to get through rubble and find people. But the greatest challenge to that effort now, and you saw it in the lead up to this part of the program, is getting outside of Kathmandu to these incredibly remote communities. And it is true that in any situation like this, it is the communities themselves who are the first responders and who have to operate alone until assistance can get out to them. That's proving still to be a massive challenge in many of these very remote areas in Nepal.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.